Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever looked at someone incredibly successful, a sports champion, a tech visionary, a musical legend, and found yourself thinking, how do they do that? They must just be brilliant, right? A genius.
Uh-huh.
Well, today, we're embarking on a deep dive into some truly fascinating insights, particularly from Malcolm Gladwell's groundbreaking book, Outliers, The Story of Success, Our Mission, to thoroughly challenge that very conventional idea of individual genius.
What's truly compelling here is how the typical narrative of success, often fixated on innate intelligence and sheer unyielding ambition, is far too simplistic, even misleading.
Right.
Gladwell presents a provocative argument that success, especially the kind that creates an outlier, is a much richer tapestry, woven from hidden advantages, extraordinary opportunities, and often surprising cultural legacies. It's about consciously shifting our focus, not just looking at someone, but looking around them and understand the forces that shaped their journey.
Exactly. We've gathered a stack of core arguments from Gladwell's work that will, I promise, fundamentally shift your perspective on what truly makes someone exceptional. Get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about success. We begin our journey into these unseen forces with a truly mysterious case that utterly baffled the medical community in the late 1950s, the Roseto anomaly.
Oh, yeah, Roseto. Fascinating.
Imagine a small, unassuming town in eastern Pennsylvania called Roseto. Doctors were astonished to discover that almost no one under the age of 65 suffered from heart disease.
Which was unheard of back then.
Totally. This was truly remarkable, especially when you consider that, at the time, heart disease was rampant across America, a leading killer. Doctors like Stuart Wolfe and John Brune were confronted with a medical anomaly that defied all conventional understanding. They needed to find out what was Roseto's secret.
It was a profound enigma, and their initial hypotheses were precisely what any medical professional would expect. They first looked at diet.
Makes sense.
Was it some hidden superfood or a return to a healthier old world cuisine? But no. The Rostons, immigrants from Italy, were cooking with lard, not the healthier olive oil their ancestors used.
Lard, really?
Yeah. Their pizza was a far cry from the light, traditional Italian versions you might imagine. It was a heavy bread dough laden with sausage, pepperoni, salami, ham, and sometimes even eggs.
Wow, okay.
Sweets, once reserved for holidays, were consumed with abandon year-round. A detailed dietary analysis revealed a shocking 41% of their calories came directly from fat.
41%. So a healthy diet was definitely not the secret.
Definitely not.
And what about exercise? Were the residents of Roseto all secret marathon runners? Perhaps early risers dedicated to brisk runs or morning yoga sessions?
Not at all. Far from it. There were no early morning fitness enthusiasts to be found. Many residents smoked heavily, and a significant portion of the population struggled with obesity. So regular, rigorous exercise was clearly not the answer either. With diet and exercise ruled out, they then turned to genetics.
Okay, the gene pool theory.
Exactly. The Rositans were a remarkably close-knit group, with many tracing their origins back to the same small village in southern Italy. Perhaps they were a particularly hardy, genetically robust stock.
Seems plausible.
But when researchers meticulously tracked down relatives of Rositans living elsewhere in the United States, those relatives did not share the same remarkable immunity to heart disease. The genetic theory was, once again, debunked. Finally, they considered the environment. Could it be something unique about the foothills of eastern Pennsylvania?
Like the water or the air or something?
Maybe. Yet nearby towns like Bangor and Nazareth, similar in size and demographic makeup, exhibited heart disease rates 3 times higher for men over 65.
3 times higher?
Yeah. Every single conventional medical explanation failed. It was truly bewildering.
So the doctors hit a dead end with all the conventional explanations. What was the secret of Roseto? How did they finally crack the code?
They realized the answer wasn't in the individual Rositans at all, but around them.
Around them. How so?
No, the secret was the very fabric of Roseto itself, the extraordinary strength of its community. As Wolfe and Brune meticulously observed, Rositans constantly visited one another without invitation, stopping to chat animatedly in Italian on the street corners, cooking for each other in their backyards, creating an unbroken tapestry of social interaction.
So just constant connection.
Constant. Their social structure was built around deeply interconnected, extended family clans, with 3 generations often living under one roof, showing immense, palpable respect for grandparents and elders.
That sounds different.
Very. The local church, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, played a crucial, unifying, and remarkably calming role in their daily lives. In a town of fewer than 2,000 people, there were an astonishing 22 separate civic organizations drawing everyone into collective life.
22 in a town that small.
Incredible, right. And critically, the community fostered a powerful egalitarian ethos. The wealthy were subtly discouraged from flaunting their success, preventing envy and social stratification. Conversely, the unsuccessful were helped to obscure their failures, preventing shame, isolation, and the profound stress that often accompanies social stigma. This collective, supportive environment minimized stress, fostered a deep sense of belonging, and provided a constant, unspoken buffer against the pressures of modern life.
Wow. The Roseto anomaly completely rewrites the medical textbook. It shows us that community, the values of our environment, and the people we surround ourselves with can be a literal lifesaver.
Exactly. Your social fabric is as vital as your diet or exercise regimen.
It wasn't about individual choices. It was the collective well-being that provided their remarkable health. It makes you wonder how many other anomalies are hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to look beyond the individual.
Absolutely.
If something as intangible as community can shape health so profoundly, what about the seemingly simple details that might shape an individual's success? Like, for instance, the month you were born.
The hockey example, yes.
Yeah. Let's turn to a peculiar pattern in Canadian junior hockey that reveals another hidden hand of opportunity, what's known as the Matthew effect.
Right.
When you examine the rosters of elite junior hockey teams, like the Medicine Hat Tigers or the Vancouver Giants, you notice something truly strange. A disproportionate number of their top players are born in the first 3 months of the year, January, February, March.
It's uncanny.
It's almost as if the universe itself conspires to make these kids stars. Listen to this play-by-play from a Memorial Cup final, but with birth dates instead of names. March 11 starts around one side of the Tigers' net, leaving the puck for his teammate, January 4, who passes it to January 22, who flips it back to March 12, who shoots point blank at the Tigers' goalie, April 27. April 27 blocks the shot, but it's rebounded by Vancouver's March 6. He shoots. Medicine Hat defenseman, February 9 and February 14, dive to block the puck, while January 10 looks on helplessly. March 6 scores. It sounds less like hockey and more like some bizarre astrological sporting ritual, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, but the reason for this pattern is surprisingly simple and, as you noted, completely arbitrary. The eligibility cutoff date for H-class hockey in Canada is January 1st.
January 1st, that's it.
That's it. This means a child turning 10 on January 2nd could be playing alongside someone who won't turn 10 until December 31st of that same year.
Almost a full year older.
Exactly. At ages 9 or 10, this seemingly small 12-month gap represents an enormous difference in physical maturity. The child born earlier in the year is often significantly bigger, stronger, and more coordinated simply due to nearly a full extra year of physical development. They're simply more physically ready for the game.
And this seemingly innocuous rule leads directly to what the sociologist Robert Merton famously called the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Coaches, when forming all-star teams at these crucial young ages, naturally gravitate towards the kids who appear more talented, who are, in fact, just the older, more physically developed ones.
They stand out more visibly.
These all-stars then receive invaluable benefits. More practice time, access to better coaching, more competitive games, and a higher level of competition that pushes them further. It creates a powerful, virtuous cycle for them. They start with an unearned advantage, and the system then makes them better, inadvertently validating that initial arbitrary selection. The early bloomers get all the attention, and their advantage snowballs.
This phenomenon is far from confined to Canadian youth hockey. We see strikingly similar skewed birthdate distributions in European soccer based on their different eligibility dates.
Oh, really? Like where?
For instance, in England, with the September 1st cutoff, a study of the 1990s Premier League revealed 288 players born between September and November compared to a mere 136 in June through August.
Wow, that's more than double.
Think about that disparity. Or consider the Czech Republic's 2007 Junior World Cup Finals team. Almost no players were born in the last half of the year after their January 1st cutoff.
Good.
This systemic bias also profoundly persists in education. Parents sometimes intuitively hold a child back from kindergarten if they're born late in the year, understanding that being older helps.
Yeah, people talk about redshirting kindergartners.
And they're absolutely right, because that initial advantage of being more mature in class doesn't just disappear. It locks children into patterns of achievement or discouragement that can stretch for years, impacting their confidence and their perceived abilities far beyond early childhood.
This isn't about astrology. It's about deeply embedded systemic issues. It tells us that our cherished notion of the best and brightest effortlessly rising to the top is far too simplistic, perhaps even naive.
Very much so.
The hockey players are undoubtedly talented, yes, but they also received an enormous unearned head start, an opportunity they neither deserved nor consciously earned. It highlights how the very structures we create to identify, nurture, and cultivate talent can inadvertently and quite unfairly favor some simply due to an arbitrary date.
What this truly illuminates is the concept of a cumulative advantage. A small initial difference, like being a few months older, leads to a significant opportunity, such as making the all-star team.
Right, the better coaching, more games.
Exactly. This opportunity then amplifies that initial difference because the player receives superior practice, better coaching, and more intense competition. This, in turn, leads to yet another opportunity and so on in a compounding effect until the player genuinely becomes an outlier.
But they didn't start as an outlier.
Precisely. They began with a slight edge, and the system compounded that tiny difference into something monumental. This uncovers a profound inefficiency and inherent unfairness in many of our talent identification systems.
Yeah.
For example, in the Czech athletic population, this means essentially squandering the potential talent of half its entire athletic pool simply because they happen to be born in the wrong 6 months of the year.
That's staggering when you think about the lost potential. From the subtle advantage of a birth date, let's now turn to the sheer, monumental volume of effort required for true mastery. We're talking about the famous 10,000-hour rule.
Ah, yes, the magic number.
A magic number that many experts now cite as the essential benchmark for achieving world-class expertise. Neurologist Daniel Levitin is quite emphatic on this point, stating, 10,000 hours of practice is required to achieve the level of mastery associated with being a world-class expert in anything.
This magic number isn't some arbitrary guess or a catchy marketing phrase. It's rooted in extensive, rigorous research, particularly from psychologists like K. Anders Ericsson.
Yep.
Consider his seminal study of violinists at Berlin's elite Academy of Music. He meticulously divided them into 3 distinct groups: the stars, who were destined for world-class soloist careers; the merely good players; and those expected to become music teachers.
Right, different tiers of ability.
Well, potential, yeah. While all of them started playing around age 5, initially practicing a similar 2-3 hours a week, a crucial difference began to emerge quite early, around age 8. The stars began practicing significantly more.
How much more?
Like 6 hours a week by age 9, 8 hours by 12, 16 by 14, and so on, steadily increasing their commitment until by age 20, they averaged over 30 hours a week, totaling well over 10,000 hours.
Oh, and the others didn't keep pace.
Not even close. The good students averaged around 8,000 hours total, and the future teachers only about 4,000. What's striking is that Ericsson and his colleagues found no naturals who effortlessly floated to the top without immense effort.
Really? No Mozart's just born brilliant.
Not according to their findings, nor any grinds who worked harder than everyone else but simply couldn't break the top ranks. Their research overwhelmingly suggested that once a musician possessed enough initial ability to gain entry into a top music school, the singular factor that truly distinguished one performer from another was simply how much they practiced.
Just sheer hours.
Deliberate, focused practice hours. And the very best didn't just work harder, they worked much, much harder.
So the core implication here is profound. Practice isn't what you do once you're good. It's precisely what makes you good.
That's the takeaway.
But 10,000 hours is an enormous, almost inconceivable amount of time for a young person to accumulate. If you calculate it, that's roughly 20 hours a week every week for 10 straight years.
It's a massive commitment.
How does anyone manage to accumulate that kind of dedicated time by young adulthood? It suggests something far beyond individual will or mere talent.
Exactly. It's almost an impossible feat to hit that number all by yourself, through sheer individual grit alone. You need very specific, fortunate circumstances.
Like what?
First, you absolutely need robust parental support and encouragement. This isn't just about emotional backing, it's also about practical support. You can't be from a poor background, because if you're struggling to make ends meet and have to work a side job,
Right, no time left.
there simply won't be enough time in the day left for such dedicated, uninterrupted practice. Most crucially, almost everyone who reaches that 10,000-hour mark does so because they gained entry into some kind of special program like a hockey all-star squad, as we discussed, or if they were given some extraordinary, almost serendipitous opportunity that provided the environment, the resources, and the uninterrupted time necessary to put in those grueling hours.
Let's look at some concrete examples that vividly illustrate this incredible convergence of opportunity and deliberate practice. Take Bill Joy.
Ah, the Edison of the internet.
Right. Co-founder of Sun Microsystems. He arrived at the University of Michigan in 1971, not even intending to be a computer scientist. He'd literally never done anything with computers in high school.
Amazing.
But Michigan, by a stroke of sheer luck, happened to have one of the world's most advanced computer science programs, boasting extensive computing power and, critically, early access to time-sharing terminals.
Which were super rare back then.
Incredibly rare and expensive, yeah. Joy found himself, by the happiest of accidents, in one of the very few places on Earth where a curious 17-year-old could literally program all he wanted, experimenting and learning without constraint. He seized that opportunity, immersing himself in the nascent world of computing.
Then there are the Beatles. Before their explosive 1964 U.S. success, they had already been playing together for 7 arduous years.
7 years before Ed Sullivan.
Yep. What truly forged them, however, was their time in Hamburg, Germany, between 1960 and 1962. They had 5 separate stints there, playing in grimy clubs like the Indra and the Star Club, often for hours on end, 5 to 8 hours a night, 7 nights a week.
8 hours a night. How?
Fueled sometimes by amphetamines just to maintain that grueling pace. John Lennon himself famously called it the making of them.
I bet.
They weren't just playing, they were performing under duress, forced to improvise, learn new songs on the fly, stretch their sets, and interact with rowdy audiences. This experience honed their stamina, their stage presence, and built an enormous intuitive repertoire of hundreds of songs. Okay. By the time they landed in the U.S. in 1964, they had already logged an estimated 1,200 live performances, a number most bands never achieve in their entire careers.
1,200.
This wasn't just practice. It was a brutal, transformative forge that hissered them into world-class performers.
And perhaps the most compelling example is Bill Gates himself. The broad outline of his story is universally known. Brilliant young math whiz, discovers programming, drops out of Harvard, builds Microsoft into a global giant.
The classic narrative.
But if you dig deeper, you uncover a remarkable series of incredibly lucky events, as Gates himself humbly describes them. He attended Lakeside School in 1968, one of the very few high schools in the entire country with access to a time-sharing terminal, a luxury typically reserved for universities.
Just pure luck of the draw, being at that school.
Totally. His mother's club generously paid for the initial computer fees. When that funding eventually ran out, a parent at Computer Center Corporation, or C-Cubed, happened to need free programming labor to test new software and offered Gates and his friends virtually unlimited free computer time in exchange.
Another lucky break.
Right. Later, when C-Cubed went bankrupt, Gates found another improbable opportunity. Free computer time at the University of Washington, albeit only from 3-6 a.m.
Gotta admire the dedication 3 a.m. programming sessions.
Seriously. By the time he famously dropped out of Harvard, he had been programming practically non-stop for 7 consecutive years,
Right.
easily accumulating way past 10,000 hours. This wasn't just raw brilliance. It was an extraordinary, almost miraculous convergence of opportunities, access, and timing.
If we connect all these strands to the bigger picture, it becomes abundantly clear. Extraordinary talent, whether it's the musical genius of the Beatles or the sharp analytical minds of Bill Joy and Bill Gates, is often undeniable.
Sure, they were smart.
Absolutely. However, it is the extraordinary opportunities, these almost accidental, perfectly timed circumstances that truly distinguish these outliers. They were in precisely the right place at the right time, with the right access to cutting-edge technology or a unique performance crucible, enabling them to accumulate the necessary arduous hours of deliberate practice.
So opportunity plus practice in Palizer.
In large part, yes. Their success isn't solely about their individual gifts. It's profoundly shaped by the unique environment that allowed those gifts to flourish through immense, focused, and often privileged work.
Shifting our focus now from opportunity to inherent ability. Let's talk about Christopher Langan.
The smartest man in America.
He's often hailed as one of the smartest men in America, with an IQ reportedly off the charts, as high as 195. Society as a whole holds a deep reverence, almost an awe, for geniuses like Langan. There's this pervasive belief that a higher IQ always directly translates to greater success.
Right, that more is always better.
That nothing could possibly hold someone so intellectually gifted back.
What's truly fascinating here is how that conventional belief clouds quite sharply with the nuanced reality of IQ and its relationship to real-world success. Consider the pioneering work of Lewis Terman.
The termites guy.
Exactly. The psychologist who, in the 1920s, identified 1,470 child geniuses as famous termites, all with IQs over 130. Terman was utterly convinced these children were destined to form the future elite of America.
Okay.
However, subsequent research, particularly studies utilizing tests like Raven's progressive matrices, consistently shows that the predictive relationship between IQ and real-world advantage begins to break down quite significantly once an individual's IQ reaches around 120.
Wait, it breaks down at 120? That seems low.
Relatively low, yeah.
Yeah.
This means that someone with an IQ of 130 is statistically just as likely to win a Nobel Prize as someone with an IQ of 180. The extreme top end of the IQ scale simply doesn't confer additional proportional benefits for real-world achievement.
That's a genuinely radical idea, especially in a society that so heavily values raw intelligence. But is it really that simple? Just being smart enough seems almost too dismissive of innate brilliance.
I understand that reaction, and it certainly goes against much of what we're taught and what popular culture reinforces. But Gladwell's research, building on the work of many others, points to a clear threshold effect.
A threshold, like a minimum requirement.
Kind of. Think of it like height in basketball. You absolutely need to be tall enough to play professionally, say, 6 feet or 6'1". If you're 5'5", it's virtually impossible.
Right.
But being 6'8" doesn't automatically make you a better player than someone who is 6'6". Michael Jordan, widely considered one of the greatest players ever, was 6'6".
Good point.
Intelligence, like height in this analogy, has a critical threshold. You need to be smart enough to navigate complex challenges, but beyond that point, other factors become far more critical. This is vividly evident when you look at the colleges attended by recent American Nobel Prize winners in medicine and chemistry. You find institutions like DePaul, Holy Cross, Gettysburg, and City College of New York right alongside Harvard, Yale, and MIT.
So not just the Ivy League.
Exactly. They're all undeniably good schools, but it's not exclusively the absolute best universities. It powerfully suggests that being smart enough to get into a college at least as good as Notre Dame or the University of Illinois is quite sufficient for the highest echelons of intellectual achievement.
So if IQ truly stops mattering beyond a certain point, if raw processing power isn't the sole ultimate differentiator, then what does matter? What are these elusive other things that come into play when someone reaches that intellectual threshold?
That's precisely where practical intelligence steps onto the stage, a crucial concept championed by psychologist Robert Sternberg.
Practical intelligence.
Yeah.
Like street smarts.
Sort of, but maybe more nuanced. It's not about what your IQ test measures. Instead, it's about knowing what to say to whom, knowing when to say it, and knowing how to say it for maximum effect.
Social skills, negotiation.
Exactly. It's essentially procedural knowledge, knowing how to do something, even if you can't articulate the underlying why. Think of it like riding a bicycle. You know how to balance, steer, and pedal to keep moving forward, even if you can't precisely explain the complex physics behind it.
Got it.
This kind of intelligence is inherently practical. It's not knowledge for its own sake, but rather knowledge that helps you read social situations correctly, navigate complex environments, and ultimately achieve your goals. And critically, it's a type of intelligence that's orthogonal to analytical IQ. You can possess one without the other, or ideally both.
So you can be book smart, but not people smart, or vice versa.
Precisely. Consider Liam Hudson's research, where he contrasted a student named Poole, who gave incredibly creative, even subversive answers to a uses of objects test, like using a brick for smash and grab raids or Russian roulette.
Yeah, creative indeed.
His mind leapt to imaginative, albeit unconventional, applications. In stark contrast, another student, Florence, who had a very high analytical IQ, gave unimaginative, strictly functional answers, like building things, throwing, for a brick. Florence's IQ was higher, but Poole's mind, perhaps less traditionally smart, was clearly better suited for brilliant imaginative work that required seeing beyond the obvious.
So Terman's fundamental error wasn't in identifying bright kids. It was in wildly overestimating the significance of raw IQ at the very top of the scale.
that seems to be the case.
When he painstakingly followed up on his termites as adults, he found that while some certainly thrived and had successful careers, many had remarkably ordinary lives and careers. And perhaps the most shocking revelation, none of them, not a single one, ever won a Nobel Prize.
Not one. That's incredible.
In fact, his diligent field workers and their rigid adherence to IQ scores actually rejected two future Nobel laureates, William Shockley and Luis Alvarez, from his study because their IQs simply weren't high enough to meet his arbitrary threshold.
Wow. Talk about missing the mark.
This truly drives home the idea that sheer intellectual horsepower isn't the sole, or even the primary determinant of profound real-world success beyond a certain critical threshold. Let's circle back to Christopher Langan. Despite his truly off-the-charts IQ, he struggled profoundly in college, dropping out of two different institutions.
Right, his story is quite poignant.
His initial scholarship was lost because his mother, completely unfamiliar with bureaucratic processes, didn't fill out a required financial aid form, something Langan himself had no practical knowledge of how to do.
He just didn't know how to navigate that system.
Exactly. Later at Montana State, his perfectly reasonable request to switch morning classes due to debilitating car trouble. The transmission literally having fallen out of his vehicle was callously denied by a dean who tersely told him everyone has to make sacrifices.
Ouch. No empathy there.
None. Langan was isolated, unable to connect with professors, unable to articulate his needs effectively, and consequently unable to absorb the vibration of intellectual energy from an institution. He himself candidly admits, "I have not pursued mainstream publishers as hard as I should have. I am not interested in doing it." His brilliant mind, in a profound and tragic sense, was squandered.
Now, contrast Langan's struggles with the trajectory of Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant theoretical physicist who famously led the Manhattan Project.
The father of the atomic bomb.
Right. Oppenheimer also possessed a genius-level mind but struggled severely with depression and, in a bizarre and disturbing incident during graduate school, even tried to poison his tutor.
Whoa, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a lesser-known part of his story. Yet Oppenheimer not only survived these profound personal challenges, but managed to navigate complex political landscapes, convince skeptical authorities, and ultimately lead one of the 20th century's most monumentally important scientific projects. Why such a stark difference in outcomes?
Good question. What was it?
Oppenheimer, despite his personal demons, possessed the kind of savvy that allowed him to get what he wanted from the world. He instinctively knew how to engage with people, how to persuade, how to navigate institutional hurdles, and how to assert himself effectively. That practical intelligence we talked about.
And this critical savvy or practical intelligence isn't something one is simply born with. It's painstakingly cultivated.
That's the argument, yeah. Annette Lareau's groundbreaking sociological study, Unequal Childhoods, unpacks its very origins by meticulously comparing parenting styles across different social classes.
Okay, what did she find?
She identified a parenting approach she termed concerted cultivation, prevalent among middle-class parents. These parents actively, often exhaustively, structure their children's free time with a dizzying array of organized activities like sports teams, orchestras, and various lessons.
The busy, scheduled kid?
Exactly. They engage in extensive reasoning with their children, encourage them to confidently question adults, and actively intervene on their children's behalf, for example. A mother tirelessly arranging for her child to be retested for a gifted program because she believed her child was overlooked.
Right, advocating for their kid.
This approach fosters a powerful and positive sense of entitlement in children. They acted as though they had a right to pursue their own individual preferences and to actively manage interactions in institutional settings. They learned to assert themselves effectively.
Okay, and the alternative?
In stark contrast, poor and working-class families, Lareau found, often practice what she called the accomplishment of natural growth. Their children had far less structured time, playing more informally and spontaneously with siblings and neighborhood kids, often outdoors.
More free-range kids?
Kind of. Parents in these families tended to be more passive, often feeling intimidated by authority figures in schools or medical institutions, and consequently, they were less likely to actively intervene on their children's behalf. We see this difference vividly in the example of 9-year-old Alex Williams, a middle-class boy in Lareau's study, who is African American. During a doctor's visit, Alex comfortably interrupts the doctor, "I'm not 10," He corrects when his age is misstated, and then confidently takes charge of the moment by asking, "Do you have any questions you want to ask me before I do your physical?"
Wow, at 9 years old, that's confident.
Very. This isn't genetic or racial. A white girl from a working class background, Katie Brindle, behaved with far more deference in similar situations. This is a learned cultural advantage, taught behavior that meticulously prepares children to assert themselves, negotiate, and navigate institutional settings effectively.
And this ultimately explains a profound difference between the squandered potential of Langen and the monumental achievements of Oppenheimer.
That's the connection Gladwell makes. Oppenheimer's childhood was the absolute embodiment of concerted cultivation, wealthy, progressive schooling, a constant encouragement of independent work and intellectual inquiry. Langen's was, tragically, the very opposite.
So upbringing trumped IQ in this case.
It seems so. This stark divergence in upbringing explains why one became squandered talent and the other a Nobel-caliber leader, despite similar levels of raw intelligence. Terman's ultimate follow-up on his termites found that only one factor truly mattered in predicting their adult success: their family background specifically, whether they received the kind of preparation for the world that Oppenheimer did or the lack thereof that Langen experienced.
Wow. It's a powerful reminder that brilliance isn't enough. Knowing how to operate in the world is equally, if not more, vital.
Absolutely crucial.
Now let's explore how even older, deeper cultural legacies can shape not just individual success, but even life and death situations. We'll begin with the surprising culture of honor in the remote mountains of Harlan, Kentucky.
Ah, the feuding families.
Exactly. Imagine 19th century Harlan, a truly isolated, insular, and often violent place where generations-long feuds like the infamous Howard Turner conflict resulted in brutal cyclical violence and multiple deaths. This wasn't just random acts of violence.
No, it followed a pattern.
So if one family fights, it's a feud. But when many families fight in identical little towns up and down the same mountain range, locked in similar cycles of retribution, it's not random at all. It's a distinct pattern.
It points directly to what's known as a culture of honor, a profound legacy carried over from ancient herding cultures in places like the Scottish and Irish borderlands.
Herding cultures. How does that connect?
In those societies where property like livestock could easily be stolen and central authority was weak or non-existent, a man's reputation, his standing, and his willingness to defend himself were absolutely central to his very survival and his self-worth.
Your reputation was your security.
Pretty much. Any slight, any challenge, any perceived insult had to be met with immediate and forceful defense to prove he wasn't weak or easily exploited. These settlers brought this deeply ingrained warrior ethic to the American backcountry, where the rugged, isolated environment suited it perfectly. Violence was deeply personal, not typically for economic gain, but for the fierce, often bloody defense of one's honor and standing.
Psychologists Dov Cohen and Richard Nisbett designed a truly ingenious experiment at the University of Michigan to test the astonishing persistence of this cultural legacy.
Right, the asshole experiment.
Yeah. They created a scenario where Southern and Northern male students were deliberately insulted specifically, called an asshole, by a Confederate in a hallway. The researchers then meticulously observed and measured their reactions.
The results were strikingly unequivocal. Northerners generally shrugged it off, often laughing it off. Their handshakes were unchanged, and their cortisol levels, a key stress hormone, actually decreased.
They just brushed it off.
Mostly. Only a small percentage imagined violent conclusions to a hypothetical story they were later asked to complete, where a man's fiancée was propositioned. Southerners, however, reacted with visible anger. Their cortisol and testosterone levels jumped significantly.
A real physiological response.
Definitely. Their handshakes firmed, becoming noticeably more aggressive, and they were significantly more likely to imagine violent scenarios in the story completion task. In a follow-up game of chicken in a narrow hallway with a large Confederate, Southerners were notably less likely to yield space, standing their ground.
Wow. Still holding on to that don't back down ethic.
This powerfully demonstrates that these ingrained attitudes and behavioral norms are not fleeting. They are passed down from generation to generation through a process of social inheritance, much like how specific linguistic accents can persist across centuries, resisting assimilation. It profoundly illustrates that who we are and how we instinctively react to situations cannot be separated from where we're from the cultural lessons absorbed over generations.
From personal honor in ancient feuds, cultural legacies proved to be critically important, even in something as complex and high stakes as aviation safety. Let's delve into what Malcolm Gladwell refers to as the ethnic theory of plane crashes, particularly focusing on Korean Air's alarming crash record from 1988 to 1998.
Yeah, their safety record was truly terrible for a while.
During this decade, their loss rate, meaning the rate at which planes were destroyed and lives lost, was an incredible 17 times higher than that of United Airlines.
17
A
times.
staggering statistic that deeply troubled the aviation industry. Why, fundamentally, were KAL planes crashing so often?
Modern plane crashes are almost never the result of a single catastrophic failure. They typically stem from a rare and unfortunate confluence of multiple factors: a minor technical malfunction, exceptionally bad weather, and a tired pilot.
The Swiss cheese model, right, lining up the holes.
Exactly. None of these alone are usually sufficient to cause a catastrophe, but their dangerous combination requires absolutely perfect coordination and flawless communication within the cockpit.
Okay.
Take the tragic case of Avianca Flight 052 in 1990. The plane eventually ran out of fuel trying to land at JFK Airport in New York. The pilots were fatigued, the weather was severe, but the critical fatal factor was a profound and ultimately deadly miscommunication between the flight crew and air traffic control.
How exactly did that miscommunication manifest in a way that led to such a disaster? What went wrong with the talking?
It came down to a linguistic phenomenon called mitigated speech communication that is indirect, deferential, or excessively polite, designed to soften the message or avoid direct confrontation.
Like hinting instead of stating directly.
Precisely. Linguists Robert Fisher and Judith Orasanu studied cockpit communication and found a stark pattern. Captains, speaking to their subordinates, typically issue clear, unambiguous commands like "turn 30 degrees right."
Direct order.
But first officers, when speaking to their superiors, overwhelmingly resort to hints, suggestions, or deferential statements such as, "That return at 25 miles looks mean."
Just a suggestion, not a command.
Right. This difference, this subtle linguistic dance, can be deadly. Consider the 1982 Air Florida Flight 90 crash. The first officer hinted 4 times about dangerous ice on the wings, but the captain, operating within a different communication paradigm, completely missed the implied urgency.
4 times, and the captain didn't get it.
Apparently not. With Avianca 052, the first officer, Mauricio Klotz, repeatedly used mitigated speech, saying things like, "We're running out of fuel," to New York air traffic control.
That sounds pretty direct to me.
To us, maybe. But in the strict language of air traffic control, unless you use the word emergency, it doesn't trigger specific protocols. To the American controllers who operate in a different cultural and linguistic context, this vague phrasing had no technical meaning indicating an emergency and was tragically interpreted as a mere passing comment, not a desperate plea.
Well, just because he didn't use the magic word.
Essentially. And this, I understand, ties directly into Geert Hofstede's groundbreaking concept of the Power Distance Index, or PDI.
Okay, PDI, what's that measure?
It measures how willing a culture's members are to accept hierarchical power and authority, how comfortable people are with inequality, basically.
Okay.
This PDI is absolutely central to understanding these communication failures. Cultures with a low PDI, like the USA, Sweden, or Australia, typically have leaders who underplay their power and subordinates who are unafraid to express disagreement, offer suggestions, or even challenge decisions directly.
More egalitarian.
Right. Air traffic controllers in New York, for example, are inherently from a low PDI culture. They expect direct, unambiguous communication regardless of rank. In stark contrast, high PDI cultures such as Colombia, South Korea, or Brazil emphasize strong, almost sacrosanct respect for authority. Subordinates are expected to be deferential, indirect, and to avoid any communication that might be perceived as disrespectful or challenging to a superior.
High PDI means more deference to the boss.
Exactly. This profound cultural gap precisely caused the Avianca crash. Klotz, being Colombian and from a high PDI culture, instinctively spoke deferentially and indirectly to both his captain and the American ATC. The captain, also high PDI, expected autocratic decisions and missed Klotz's subtle warnings because he wasn't accustomed to receiving direct challenges.
So the captain wasn't listening for hints.
Probably not. The low PDI American controllers, not recognizing the linguistic cues of a high PDI culture, didn't pick up on the desperate urgency of Klotz's hints. It was a complete cultural miscommunication, with Klotz even thinking the controller was angry because his hints weren't understood.
Tragic. So, given that South Korea also has a high PDI culture, How did this hierarchical dynamic play out in Korean Air's cockpits, and what were the consequences?
The cockpit culture at Korean Air was profoundly hierarchical and traditional, reflecting broader Korean societal norms. Junior officers were expected to attend to captains in myriad ways, sometimes even making dinner or buying personal gifts.
Gifts for the captain.
Yeah. One former KL pilot vividly described the dynamic as, "The captain is in charge and does what he wants, everyone else sits quietly." There was even a chilling account of a captain physically hitting a first officer for an error.
Hitting him. Good grief.
This rigid hierarchy meant that junior officers were extremely reluctant, almost culturally programmed, to challenge a captain, even when they sensed grave danger or observed critical errors. The very idea of questioning authority, especially in such a high-stakes environment, was fraught with cultural peril.
Let's analyze the KA-801 Guam crash, which claimed 229 lives, through this specific cultural lens. The flight recorder transcript must be chilling to review.
It truly is. The transcript for KA-001 on its approach to Guam reveals the captain complaining of deep exhaustion. Then, the first officer attempts a subtle warning framed as a question. "Don't you think it rains more in this area here?"
Classic mitigated speech again.
Textbook. Later, the flight engineer adds another, even more indirect suggestion. "Captain, the weather radar has helped us a lot."
Gentle hints.
These are profoundly receiver-oriented communications, a common pattern in Korean culture, where it's the listener's responsibility to infer the full meaning and urgency from a subtle cue. The tired captain, steeped in a high PDI culture that values deference, tragically misses these subtle but absolutely critical warnings.
He just didn't pick up on it.
Seems like it. When the ground proximity warning system blares, indicating they're dangerously too low, the flight engineer responds with a bewildered "hey." A sound of confusion, not the assertive command one might expect. He wasn't trained to interpret those alarms as a direct instruction to act.
He didn't know what to do.
Or felt unable to act assertively. At the very last moment, realizing the dire situation, the first officer finally escalates to a direct crew obligation statement. "Let's make a missed approach," a command to break off the landing, but by then it was tragically too late.
Too late.
While pilots are trained to take control in such situations, it's incredibly difficult to override years of cultural conditioning and directly challenge a captain who, in their experience, might rap you with the back of his hand for an incursion insubordination.
The solution to Korean Air's tragic, persistent problem was utterly dramatic and counterintuitive to some. In 2000, they hired an outsider, David Greenberg from Delta Airlines, to overhaul their entire flight operations.
It's a huge move.
His first crucial step was to evaluate the English language skills of all flight crews and then to implement English as the sole primary language for all flight operations and training, exclusively through a Western firm, Outliers. This wasn't just about learning English.
Precisely. This strategy was brilliantly effective precisely because English is a transmitter-oriented language.
Transmitter-oriented, meaning?
It places the burden squarely on the speaker's responsibility to be clear, direct, and unambiguous, regardless of their rank or the listener's presumed understanding.
So you have to be clear in English culturally.
Generally, yes, compared to high-context languages. This forced cultural shift within the cockpit compelled a dramatic reduction in power distance and actively fostered genuine cooperation. Crew members were now linguistically forced to speak directly and clearly, to state their concerns explicitly, regardless of rank, thereby transforming the communication patterns from hints to clear commands.
And it worked.
The results were immediate and profound. KL's crash rate plummeted, demonstrating the incredible and often overlooked impact of deeply ingrained cultural legacies on critical, high-stakes tasks.
Wow.
This raises an important question for all of us. Why are we so squeamish about acknowledging that each of us comes from a culture with its own distinctive, powerful mix of strengths and weaknesses? It's not about judgment or casting blame. It's about understanding how cultural norms can profoundly influence performance, for better or worse, in ways we often don't even realize.
Now let's pivot to explore how societal structure and the very nature of work itself can profoundly shape success, sometimes even transforming apparent disadvantages into extraordinary opportunities. Consider the story of Joe Vlam.
A legendary lawyer at Skadden Arps.
That's him. A legendary New York lawyer who became one of the most powerful corporate attorneys in the world. He was the son of poor Jewish immigrants, and in his era, the prestigious white shoe Wall Street law firms were like exclusive private clubs.
Very waspy, very elitist.
Totally. They hired based on deeply ingrained prejudices, Nordic appearance, the right schools, established family connections, and a polished social background. Flom, being Jewish and from Brooklyn, found doors repeatedly slammed in his face. He simply couldn't get hired by these elite firms.
A classic case of exclusion.
So he ended up at a small upstart firm called Skadden Arps, taking whatever came in the door, largely the work that prestigious firms disdained.
What's truly fascinating here is how this apparent adversity turned out to be an unexpected, almost perfectly timed advantage. Those established white shoe firms, entrenched in their traditions, disdained certain areas of law, particularly aggressive litigation, and the then niche world of proxy fights, which involved hostile corporate takeovers.
They thought that work was dirty.
Basically, yeah. They viewed this work as messy, undignified, and frankly, beneath contempt. So this work, which they saw as undesirable and unfashionable, automatically fell to the Jewish lawyers like Flom and their upstart firms who simply couldn't get jobs elsewhere and were desperate for any business.
Okay.
Flom, for 2 decades, toiled in this overlooked, unglamorous niche, meticulously perfecting his craft in hostile takeovers, which were then considered a minor, undesirable area of corporate law. He was in the trenches, doing the unglamorous work no one else wanted.
Okay, let's unpack this. The real kicker is that when hostile takeovers exploded in importance during the seismic economic shifts of the 1970s and 80s.
Suddenly, that niche was the place to be.
Exactly. Suddenly, Flom had his 10,000 hours in. He wasn't just ready. He was uniquely prepared and deeply experienced. It wasn't that he was inherently smarter than the lawyers at the entrenched white shoe firms. In fact, many were likely just as intellectually gifted.
Right.
But he just happened to possess an incredibly valuable, highly specialized skill set, honed through years of dedicated, unglamorous practice in an overlooked niche that suddenly became absolutely central to corporate finance. His supposed disadvantage became his greatest asset.
And Flum's success wasn't solely about his specific niche. It was also profoundly influenced by broader demographic luck. He was born in 1923.
Okay, why does that matter?
His generation, particularly those born in the early 1930s, was relatively small. This was a direct result of low birth rates stemming from the devastating 1918 flu epidemic and the severe economic downturns of the Great Depression.
Fewer people, less competition.
Exactly. This meant that when Flom and his cohort came of age, there was significantly less competition for entry into schools, universities, and ultimately for jobs in their prime. New York City public schools in the 1940s, for instance, were exceptional, staffed by an abundance of overqualified teachers who couldn't find university positions during the depths of the Depression.
Wow, lucky timing again.
Very lucky. Ted Friedman's story illustrates this perfectly. He easily worked his way through Michigan Law School for a mere $450 a year, an incredibly low sum, even then, in financing it with readily available, relatively high-paying factory and construction jobs during his summers. The timing of their birth gave them a clear, less competitive path that earlier and later generations simply didn't have.
To further explore this powerful immigrant advantage and the profound nature of meaningful work, let's look at another compelling story. Louis and Regina Borgenicht.
The apron makers.
Yes, Jewish immigrants who arrived in New York City in 1889 and with very little capital started a children's apron business.
Their story, too, is a true stroke of extraordinary good fortune, a convergence of factors. First, their skill set was perfectly suited to their new environment.
What skills did they have?
A remarkable 70% of Eastern European Jews coming through Ellis Island at that time had occupational skills, and an overwhelming majority were skilled in the clothing trade, particularly tailoring and sewing.
So they were already trained for the garment industry.
Exactly. Arriving in New York City with dressmaking and sewing abilities was like showing up in Silicon Valley in 1986 with 10,000 hours of computer programming already under your belt. It was the right skill in the right place at the right time.
Okay.
Second, the garment industry itself was then New York City's largest and most vibrant, offering immense immediate opportunity for skilled workers. Third, and critically, the industry was highly entrepreneurial and decentralized.
Meaning easy to start your own business.
Very easy. It had a very low threshold for entry. You could literally start a small business with just $50 for a sewing machine and a bolt of fabric. It was a trade built for small contractors and entrepreneurs like the Borgenichts to thrive.
So what does this all mean for the Borgenichts' daily lives and their path to success? They weren't just working, they were their own bosses.
Autonomy, that's key.
Their work was complex. It genuinely engaged their minds, their creativity, and their imagination. And crucially, there was an immediate, palpable, and direct relationship between effort and reward. The more aprons they meticulously sewed, the more money they literally made the very next day selling them on the streets.
Effort equals reward. Very tangible.
Louis Bourgeonet famously danced a jig with joy over his new business, despite knowing the years of backbreaking labor and intense hours that lay ahead. The potential for direct reward from his effort was exhilarating.
This vividly illustrates the concept of meaningful work, work that inherently possesses a high degree of autonomy, a satisfying level of complexity, and most importantly, a clear, tangible connection between the effort invested and the reward received.
Right. Autonomy, complexity, effort, reward link.
Exactly. Hard work, as Gladwell so eloquently puts it, is a prison sentence only if it does not have meaning. Once it does, once you see the direct fruit of your labor and control its execution, it transforms into something profoundly fulfilling.
Okay.
This contrasts sharply with the experience of many Irish and Italian immigrants of the same period, who often found work as day laborers or domestics, jobs that, while necessary, lacked the entrepreneurial possibilities and the direct effort reward linked found in the garment trade. Louise Farkas's powerful study of Jewish family trees powerfully concludes this point. Jewish doctors and lawyers did not become professionals in spite of their humble origins. They became professionals because of their humble origins.
Because of their origins.
As their garment-working forebears, through generations of self-employment and meaningful labor, instilled the values of diligence and provided the entrepreneurial opportunities that propelled their descendants into the professions.
So that background gave them the tools and the mindset. Wow. From the industriousness of New York's garment district, let's now turn our attention to a widely observed global phenomenon: the consistent excellence of Asian students in mathematics.
Ah, yes, the math stereotype. But there's more to it.
What's truly fascinating here is that the conventional wisdom often points to innate, superior ability, but our sources suggest a deeply different and far more culturally rooted explanation.
A significant foundational advantage lies in the very structure of Asian languages, particularly their number naming systems.
The language itself helps with math.
It seems so. Unlike irregular English, where we have unique words like 11, 12, 13, and 15, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean utilize a beautifully logical, transparent counting system.
How does it work?
For example, 11 is literally 10-1, 12 is 10-2, and 24 is 2 tens 4.
Ah, it's perfectly logical. Consistent.
Exactly. This seemingly small linguistic difference has a profound impact on early math acquisition. Asian children learn to count much faster and more comprehensively. 4-year-old Chinese children can count effortlessly to 40, while American children typically only reach 15 at that age.
That's a huge difference.
It is. This regularity also makes basic addition and even the conceptual understanding of fractions much, much easier, as the operation is embedded directly within the language itself. For instance, 3/5 in Chinese is literally translated as, out of 5 parts, take 3, which is conceptually clear and immediate.
So the language builds the concept in.
It appears to. This linguistic advantage, built into their very first experiences with numbers, can foster a much more positive attitude toward math from an early age, leading to greater engagement, confidence, and ultimately greater persistence.
And this linguistic advantage, surprisingly, is connected to an even deeper, profoundly ingrained cultural legacy: the nature of rice cultivation in East Asia.
Right. This is maybe the most surprising connection Gladwell makes.
That's a connection most people would never make: rice farming and math.
Indeed. It's one of Gladwell's most striking arguments. Wet rice farming, unlike most forms of Western agriculture like corn or wheat farming, is incredibly labor-intensive, 10 to 20 times more so.
10 to 20 times.
Yeah. Historically, rice farmers worked an astonishing 3,000 hours a year compared to perhaps 1,000, 1,200 for Western peasants or hunter-gatherers.
3,000 hours. That's like a modern full-time job plus overtime year-round.
Pretty much. But it's not just sheer hard labor. It's highly skill-oriented, complex, and requires meticulous, constant attention. Rice farmers had to perfectly level their fields, precisely control water flow with intricate irrigation systems, carefully space each tiny seedling, and constantly manage their crops, acting as sophisticated entrepreneurs hedging against myriad risks.
So it's complex, demanding work.
Very. Critically, there's an immediate, profound, and undeniable effort-reward link. The harder you work a rice field, the more it yields. This clear incentive for diligent, persistent effort fostered a cultural value in hard work that became deeply embedded, reflected in countless proverbs, such as, "No one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich."
Hard work pays off, literally.
This unwavering ethic of perseverance, born from the unique demands of rice cultivation, has been passed down through generations, shaping an entire cultural mindset towards effort and reward.
This cultural emphasis on persistence, this willingness to engage in arduous, detailed work, is perfectly illustrated in Robert Schoenfeld's renowned work with math students. He once famously videotaped a nurse named Renee struggling with the seemingly simple 8th grade algebra problem.
The parallel line problem, yeah.
About making a straight line parallel to the axis. Most students, when faced with such a problem that doesn't immediately yield to a solution, give up in a mere 30 seconds to 2 minutes.
They hit a wall and stop.
Renee, however, was different. She persisted for an incredible, almost unbelievable 22 minutes, making attempt after attempt, tirelessly trying different angles and approaches until she finally had a breakthrough aha moment, realizing the slope was undefined and the line would be vertical.
22 minutes. That's incredible persistence on one problem.
Right.
Schoenfeld's core insight from this and countless other observations is that being truly good at mathematics is far less about innate ability or a math gene, and far more about attitude specifically, persistence and doggedness and the willingness to work hard.
Attitude over aptitude.
To a large extent, yes. Studies show, for example, that Japanese first graders consistently work 40% longer on difficult puzzles than their American counterparts. It's not necessarily that they are inherently smarter or more talented, but that they have a cultural predisposition to keep trying, to not give up in the face of difficulty. They embrace the struggle.
This raises an important question then. Why isn't this attitude of persistence, this ingrained work ethic, more prevalent in the West, especially in American schools? Where did that disconnect originate?
It connects back, surprisingly, to the peculiar American legacy of the long summer vacation.
Summer vacation. How does that fit in?
Historically, Western agriculture involved fallow periods and distinct seasonal rhythms, which were then, in the 19th century, applied by educational reformers to the concept of the mind. They believed intellectual effort must be balanced by extensive rest.
The brain needs a summer break like the fields need to lie fallow.
That was the thinking. Carl Alexander's longitudinal study in Baltimore provides stark, undeniable evidence of the consequences. A modest 32-point reading gap between rich and poor first graders more than doubled by 5th grade.
Doubled. Why?
Because wealthy children, often from concerted cultivation backgrounds like Alex Williams, gained skills over the summer through camps, tutoring, and access to books and enriching experiences. Poor children, like Katie Brendel, often lost significant ground, spending their summers watching television, losing precious academic momentum.
The summer slide.
Exactly. This phenomenon is known as summer learning loss, and it's a huge factor in the achievement gap. Contrast this with Asian school years, which are significantly longer. South Korea, 220 days, Japan, 243 days compared to the U.S. at a mere 180 days.
Wow, way more school days.
More time for learning, less time to unlearn what they've been taught.
This brings us to a remarkable, inspiring success story. The KPP Academy in the South Bronx.
Knowledge is Power program, yes.
A lottery-based middle school specifically designed for low-income minority students. They consistently rock in math, outperforming much wealthier schools.
KPP's strategy is a direct, conscious application of the rice paddy logic. They implement an extended school day and year.
How extended?
Students wake up at 5:45 a.m., have classes on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., and attend school for 3 extra weeks in July. They effectively eliminate the long summer vacation, directly addressing that critical summer learning loss.
Basically, more time equals more learning.
More time and a different approach. This intensely structured environment provides meaningful work. Teachers, like the dedicated Frank Corcoran, might spend 20 minutes meticulously on a single math problem, slowing the pace, allowing for deeper digestion and retention. This fosters precisely the clear relationship between effort and reward seen in the rice paddies.
So it's not just more time, but better use of time focused on persistence.
Yes. The compelling story of Marita, a 12-year-old KPP student, embodies this. She gives up evenings, weekends, and time with friends for school. It's an immense sacrifice.
Huge sacrifice for a kid.
Huge. In return, KPP makes an incredible promise. to get 84% of their students to or above grade level in math, leading to high school scholarships and college attendance for over 80%, often the first in their family to ever attend higher education. It's a bargain for a chance, as Gladwell puts it.
A bargain for a
A
chance.
chance built not on innate genius, but on the potent cultural legacy of hard, meaningful, and persistent work. #outro.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of success? Our deep dive today reveals that the cherished stories we tell ourselves about success of the lone genius toiling in isolation, the truly self-made individual rising from absolutely nothing, powered only by their own brilliance, are often profoundly incomplete, even deeply misleading.
If we connect all these disparate examples to the bigger picture, it becomes abundantly clear. Outliers are not exceptional or mysterious because of some innate magical quality. Their extraordinary success is deeply grounded in a web of advantages and inheritances. Some diligently earned, some undeniably lucky, and some simply undeserved. From arbitrary birth dates that disproportionately launch sports careers to early, almost accidental access to cutting-edge technology for future tech billionaires, to deeply ingrained cultural practices that shape communication or instill an unwavering work ethic, these often hidden factors are critically decisive.
Bill Gates, despite his undeniable genius, could humbly accept the title but quickly admitted, "I was very lucky." And that's the profound lesson here.
Humility in the face of luck.
Yeah. No one, not rock stars who electrify stadiums, not athletes who defy gravity, not software billionaires who redefine industries, and not even intellectual giants like Chris Langan truly makes it alone. They're always, in some fundamental way, products of their history, their community, their unique opportunities, and their cultural legacy.
This raises a truly important, almost haunting question for all of us. If a million teenagers had been given the exact same extraordinary opportunity that Bill Gates had in 1968, virtually unlimited access to a cutting-edge time-sharing terminal in a supportive environment, how many more Microsofts, how many more groundbreaking software companies might we have today?
Yeah.
If Canada had a second, equally funded and supported hockey league specifically for those born in the last half of the year, it would almost certainly have twice as many adult hockey stars right now. We're just leaving talent on the table because of these arbitrary structures.
The lesson is simple, yet so often overlooked by society. To build a truly better, more equitable, and more prosperous world, we need to move far beyond a patchwork of lucky breaks and arbitrary advantages.
We need systems, not just luck.
Imagine a society consciously designed to provide meaningful opportunities for all, systematically extending the resources of that grocer, the fruits of those riots, the possibilities of that culture, and the privileges of that skin tone to absolutely everyone, regardless of their starting point. How much richer, how much more innovative, how much more fulfilling, and how much more successful could our collective potential truly be?
Marita, in the South Bronx, didn't need a higher IQ or a bigger apartment. She needed a chance, a structured, intentional opportunity to apply herself diligently. And KPP, by bringing a little bit of the rice patty, the miracle of meaningful, persistent work combined with a supportive environment gave her that profoundly transformative chance.
And that for today is our deep dive into the true story of success. Keep thinking about what you now understand differently about how people truly thrive in the world and how we might build more pathways for everyone to become their own version of an outlier.